When the black sedan's tires screamed against wet asphalt at midnight, Royal Guard Captain Marcus Kane had no idea that the next 12 hours would unravel a conspiracy that reached the highest levels of the fictional kingdom of Aldoria. Inside that fleeing vehicle sat Princess Elena, the kingdom's beloved 8-year-old heir, tears streaming down her face as she clutched a stuffed dragon, the only witness to a crime that could topple the crown itself. What began as a routine security detail would become a heart-stopping chase through the kingdom's darkest secrets, where loyalty would be tested, lives would hang in the balance, and a child's innocent trust would be the key to exposing a betrayal decades in the making. The rain hammered against the bulletproof windows of the royal convoy as it wound through the narrow mountain roads leading away from Castle Valdoria. Captain Marcus Kane adjusted his earpiece and scanned the darkness beyond the headlights, his trained eyes searching for any sign of trouble. 20 years of service to the royal family had taught him that danger often came when least expected, and tonight felt different, charged with an electricity that made his instincts scream warnings. In the lead vehicle, Duchess Catherine Mormont sat rigidly beside young Princess Elena, her usually composed features tight with anxiety. The emergency evacuation from the castle had been sudden, triggered by intelligence reports of a credible threat against the royal family. What should have been a simple transfer to the secure mountain retreat had become something far more sinister when the Duchess received a coded message on her phone just minutes into the journey. Princess Elena pressed her face against the window, her breath fogging the glass as she watched the forest blur past. At 8 years old, she possessed an intelligence that often surprised adults, and she could sense the tension radiating from every person in the convoy. Her stuffed dragon, Sir Emerald, sat clutched in her small arms, a gift from her late mother that never left her side. The child had been unusually quiet since leaving the castle, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom beyond her years. The convoy consisted of 3 armored vehicles, the lead car carrying the Duchess and Princess, the middle vehicle housing additional security personnel, and the rear car where Captain Kane rode with his most trusted agents. The route had been planned meticulously, taking back roads through the Thornwick Mountains to avoid populated areas where an ambush might be easier to execute. Every detail had been considered, every contingency planned for, except betrayal from within. As they crested a hill overlooking the Silverbrook Valley, Duchess Catherine's phone buzzed with an incoming message. Her face paled as she read the encrypted text, her hands beginning to tremble. The message was brief but devastating. The child knows. Eliminate all witnesses. Make it look like an accident. The sender was someone she had trusted implicitly, someone whose betrayal cut deeper than any blade. The Duchess glanced at Princess Elena, who was now dozing against the window, Sir Emerald tucked securely under her arm. In that moment, Catherine Mormont made a decision that would define the rest of her life. She could not, would not, allow harm to come to this innocent child, regardless of the consequences. Her loyalty to the crown ran deeper than her fear of the shadowy figures who had been pulling strings from behind the scenes. Without warning, the Duchess instructed the driver to deviate from the planned route. "Take the eastern fork toward Raven's Hollow," she commanded, her voice steady despite the chaos in her mind. The driver, a man who had served the royal family for 15 years, hesitated for only a moment before complying. The sudden route change triggered immediate concern from Captain Kane, whose voice crackled through the radio demanding an explanation. "Duchess, we need to maintain the established route for security purposes." Kane's voice was firm but respectful. He had worked with Catherine Mormont for over a decade and had never known her to make reckless decisions. Something was very wrong, and every instinct he possessed was now on high alert. Catherine keyed the radio with shaking hands. "There's been a change of plans, Captain. I'll explain when we reach the safe house." But even as she spoke the words, she knew there would be no safe house, no peaceful resolution to the nightmare that was unfolding. The conspiracy she had stumbled upon reached too high, involved too many powerful people who would stop at nothing to protect their secrets. The lead vehicle suddenly accelerated, pulling away from the convoy as it took the fork toward Raven's Hollow. Princess Elena stirred in her seat, awakened by the change in speed and direction. Her young eyes met the Duchess's, and in that moment, Catherine saw a flicker of understanding that chilled her to the bone. Somehow, this child knew more than she was letting on. "Are we in danger?" Elena asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. The directness of the question caught the Duchess off guard. Most children would ask where they were going or when they would arrive, but Princess Elena cut straight to the heart of the matter with an insight that was both impressive and heartbreaking. Before Catherine could respond, the radio exploded with Kane's voice, now sharp with authority and concern. All units, the lead vehicle has gone off route. I repeat, Princess Elena's vehicle is not following the security protocol. All units converge on the eastern fork immediately. The captain's training kicked in automatically, but his mind raced with possibilities, none of them good. The Duchess made a split-second decision that would change everything. She grabbed the radio and spoke directly to Kane, her voice carrying a weight that conveyed the gravity of the situation. Marcus, listen to me very carefully. There are people in the castle who want to hurt Elena, people we trusted. I'm taking her somewhere safe, but you cannot follow the standard protocols. They'll be watching those routes. The revelation hit Kane like a physical blow. In 20 years of service, he had never encountered a threat from within the royal household itself. His mind immediately began calculating possibilities, analyzing every person who had access to their route plans, their security protocols, their safe houses. The list was shorter than he liked, but every name on it represented someone he had considered above suspicion. As the lead vehicle disappeared around a bend in the mountain road, Kane made his own crucial decision. He ordered one of his agents to maintain radio contact with the main security detail while he personally pursued the Duchess and Princess. If there truly was a conspiracy within the castle walls, then the normal chains of command could not be trusted. He would have to rely on his own judgment and 20 years of experience protecting the royal family. The chase began in earnest as Kane's vehicle roared through the mountain curves, its headlights cutting through the darkness as rain continued to pound the windshield. Behind him, he could hear confused chatter on the radio as other security teams tried to understand what was happening. Some voices he trusted implicitly, others he now questioned. The paranoia of not knowing who could be believed was almost as dangerous as the physical threat they were facing. Princess Elena had fully awakened now, her small hand gripping the Duchess's arm as she felt the car taking the curves at dangerous speeds. "Duchess Catherine, why is Captain Kane chasing us?" she asked, her voice remarkably calm for a child in such circumstances. The question revealed that Elena understood far more about their situation than any 8-year-old should have to. Catherine struggled to find words that would comfort the child without lying to her. Elena deserved honesty, but how could she explain that the very people sworn to protect her might now be the greatest threat to her safety? "We're playing a very serious game of hide and seek," she said finally, immediately regretting the childish explanation. Princess Elena's expression told her that such platitudes would not suffice. The radio crackled again with Kane's voice, now tinged with desperation. "Catherine, I don't know who we can trust either, but running isn't the answer. Let me help you. Let me protect her." The sincerity in his voice was unmistakable, but the Duchess had learned that sincerity could be feigned. The people she had known for years could harbor secrets that would destroy everything she believed in. As they raced through the night, the Duchess began to piece together the events that had led to this moment. The intelligence reports about threats against the royal family had been suspiciously vague. The evacuation order had come through unusual channels, and several key security personnel had been reassigned just days before. What had seemed like standard security precautions now appeared to be carefully orchestrated moves in a larger game. Princess Elena suddenly spoke up, her voice cutting through the tension like a blade. The man with the scar on his hand was talking to someone on the phone about making things look like an accident. The words hung in the air like a death sentence, confirming Catherine's worst fears while revealing that the child had been listening to conversations she should never have overheard. The Duchess felt her blood turn to ice. She knew exactly who Elena was referring to. Colonel Blackwood, the head of internal security, and one of the most trusted figures in the Royal Guard. If he was involved in the conspiracy, then their situation was even more desperate than she had imagined. No safe house would be truly safe. No ally could be trusted without question. Behind them, Kane's vehicle was gaining ground, its more powerful engine cutting through the mountain roads with practiced efficiency. The captain's mind was racing as he tried to make sense of the Duchess's words and the princess's shocking revelation. If Colonel Blackwood was involved in a plot against the royal family, then the corruption ran deeper than anyone had suspected. The lead vehicle suddenly veered off the main road onto a narrow dirt track that led deeper into the forest. The move caught Kane by surprise, forcing him to brake hard and nearly lose control on the wet gravel. As he recovered and followed the track into the woods, he realized that the Duchess was heading for the old logging roads that crisscrossed this part of the mountains, a maze of paths that could hide them for hours or lead them into a deadly trap. In the lead car, Princess Elena had gone very quiet, her dark eyes focused on something in the distance that the adults couldn't see. When she finally spoke, her words sent chills down everyone's spine. "Sir Emerald says the bad men are already waiting for us." The stuffed dragon seemed to glow in the dim light of the car's interior. And for a moment, everyone wondered if an 8-year-old's imagination might be the most reliable intelligence they had. The Duchess made one final radio call to Kane, her voice heavy with resignation and determination. "Marcus, if something happens to me, promise me you'll get Elena to her grandmother in Northmere. She's the only one left who can be trusted." The transmission cut off abruptly as the lead vehicle disappeared deeper into the forest, leaving Kane with more questions than answers, and a growing certainty that the next few hours would determine the fate of the kingdom itself. As the first part of their desperate flight came to an end, the sound of additional vehicles echoing through the mountains suggested that their pursuers had grown in number. The game of hide-and-seek that the Duchess had described to Princess Elena was about to become deadly serious, with the life of an innocent child hanging in the balance and the future of the crown itself at stake. The narrow logging road twisted through ancient pine trees like a serpent, their branches creating a canopy so thick that even the convoy's powerful headlights barely penetrated the darkness. Captain Kane pushed his vehicle to its limits, the engine roaring as he fought to maintain visual contact with the Duchess's car ahead. Every instinct screamed that this was a trap, but his oath to protect Princess Elena overrode every tactical consideration. In the lead vehicle, Duchess Catherine's driver, a man named Thomas, who had served the royal household faithfully for 15 years, was beginning to show signs of strain. His knuckles were white against the steering wheel as he navigated the treacherous turns, and sweat beaded on his forehead despite the cool mountain air. "My lady," he said carefully, "these roads haven't been maintained in years. One wrong turn and we could go over a cliff." Princess Elena had been unusually quiet since her cryptic warning about Sir Emerald, but now she spoke with a clarity that startled everyone in the car. "Thomas knows these roads better than anyone. He used to bring me here to see the eagle's nest when I was smaller." The statement was delivered with such confidence that it took the adults a moment to process what she had said. Thomas had indeed brought the princess to this area on nature expeditions, but how could she possibly remember the complex network of trails from those childhood visits? The Duchess turned to look at the child more closely, seeing for the first time the intelligence that had been hidden behind Elena's typically playful demeanor. "Elena, sweetheart, how much do you really know about what's happening tonight?" The question was asked gently, but with an underlying urgency that demanded honesty. The 8-year-old princess hugged Sir Emerald closer to her chest, her dark eyes reflecting a wisdom that seemed impossible for someone so young. "I know that Uncle Blackwood isn't really my uncle, and I know that he's been meeting with people who want to hurt our family. I've been listening when adults think I'm not paying attention." The admission sent shockwaves through the car, as the implications of a child's innocent eavesdropping began to unfold. Behind them, Kane's radio crackled with increasingly urgent communications from the main security detail. Multiple vehicles were now converging on their location, but the captain could no longer be certain which ones contained allies and which might be part of the conspiracy that was unraveling before their eyes. The voice of Colonel Blackwood himself came through the speakers, his tone measured and authoritative as always. "Captain Kane, you need to bring that vehicle back to the main convoy immediately. The Duchess is clearly suffering from some kind of breakdown, and the princess is in danger as long as she remains with her." Blackwood's words were carefully chosen, designed to sound reasonable and concerned, but Kane detected something underneath the surface, a tension that suggested the colonel was not being entirely truthful. Kane made a decision that went against every protocol he had ever learned. Instead of responding to the colonel's direct order, he switched to a private channel and attempted to contact someone he had known since their days training together at the Royal Military Academy. Lieutenant Sarah Winters was currently stationed at the northern outpost, far enough from the castle to be outside the immediate sphere of any conspiracy. "Sarah, this is Marcus. I need you to listen very carefully and not respond through normal channels." Kane's voice was low and urgent as he spoke into his personal communicator. "There's a situation involving Princess Elena. I need you to verify the location of Colonel Blackwood and Deputy Commander Morrison. Do it quietly and get back to me on this channel only." The response came back within minutes, and the information Sarah provided confirmed Kane's worst fears. According to the duty logs, Colonel Blackwood should have been at the castle coordinating the emergency response, but he had actually left the compound over an hour ago with a small team of hand-picked men. Deputy Commander Morrison, who should have been leading the search efforts, was similarly unaccounted for. In the lead vehicle, Princess Elena had begun to share more details about the conversations she had overheard, painting a picture of a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the royal government. "They were talking about making it look like an accident in the mountains," she said quietly, her small voice barely audible over the engine noise. Uncle Blackwood said that grandmother in Northmere was getting too suspicious and asking too many questions about Mama's accident. The reference to Elena's mother, the late Crown Princess Isabella, who had died in a car accident 3 years earlier, sent ice through Catherine's veins. If Elena was right, if her mother's death had not been the tragic accident everyone believed it to be, then the current situation was far more complex and dangerous than anyone had imagined. The princess was not just a target because of what she might know. She was a threat to people who had already committed the ultimate crime against the royal family. Thomas suddenly slammed on the brakes, bringing the vehicle to a skidding halt in the middle of the narrow road. Ahead of them, a massive tree had fallen across the path, completely blocking their route. But as the headlights illuminated the obstacle, it became clear that this was no natural occurrence. The tree had been cut down recently, its placement too perfect to be coincidental. "It's a trap," Kane's voice came through the radio as his vehicle pulled up behind them. "Everyone out of the cars now." The captain's training took over as he assessed the tactical situation. The fallen tree effectively boxed them in. They couldn't go forward, and turning around on the narrow road would take precious time they didn't have. The sound of engines echoing through the forest from multiple directions confirmed that their pursuers were closing in. Duchess Catherine grabbed Princess Elena's hand and pulled her from the car. Sir Emerald clutched tightly in the child's other arm. "We have to go into the forest," she said, her voice steady despite the fear coursing through her body. "Stay close to me, and whatever happens, don't let go of my hand." Kane and his 2 agents quickly joined them, their weapons drawn and their eyes scanning the tree line for signs of movement. The captain's mind was racing through options, trying to find a way to protect the princess while navigating terrain that heavily favored their pursuers. The forest was thick enough to provide cover, but it was also unfamiliar territory where they could easily become lost or separated. As they moved away from the vehicles and deeper into the woods, Princess Elena suddenly stopped and pointed to a barely visible path leading up the mountainside. "That way leads to the old watchtower," she said with surprising confidence. "Thomas showed me once. There's a radio there that connects to grandmother's house in Northmere." The statement gave everyone pause. If Elena was right, if there really was a functional radio at an abandoned watchtower, it might be their only chance to contact someone outside the conspiracy's reach. But climbing to a high, exposed position also carried obvious risks, especially with armed pursuers somewhere in the darkness behind them. The sound of car doors slamming echoed through the forest, followed by voices shouting orders. Kane estimated at least 6 men, possibly more, and their coordinated movements suggested military training. These were not ordinary criminals. They were professionals who knew how to hunt people in difficult terrain. The captain made a quick decision based on 20 years of experience and a desperate need to protect the child in their care. "Thomas, you and Agent Rodriguez head down the mountain toward the main road," Kane whispered urgently. "Make noise, leave a clear trail, draw them away from us." It was asking the men to put themselves in danger to protect the princess, but both nodded without hesitation. Their loyalty to the royal family ran deeper than their concern for personal safety. As the 2 men crashed through the underbrush, deliberately making themselves easy to follow, Kane led the Duchess and Princess up the steep path toward the watchtower. Elena moved with surprising agility for an 8-year-old, her small feet finding purchase on rocks and roots that would have challenged adults. Sir Emerald bounced against her side with each step, the stuffed dragon somehow managing to look determined despite being inanimate. The climb was brutal, made worse by the need to move quietly while still making reasonable time. Behind them, they could hear their pursuers taking the bait, following Thomas and Rodriguez down the mountain. But Kane knew that professional hunters would eventually realize the deception and return to search for the real prizes. They had perhaps 30 minutes before the net would close around them again. Princess Elena proved to be an invaluable guide, her childhood memories of the area surprisingly detailed and accurate. She led them around hidden pitfalls and through shortcuts that shaved precious minutes off their ascent. When they finally reached the old watchtower, a stone structure that had been abandoned for decades, even Kane was impressed by the child's navigation skills. The radio equipment was ancient but functional, a testament to the robust military engineering of a previous era. As Catherine worked to establish contact with the northern regions where Princess Elena's grandmother held court, Kane positioned himself at the tower's windows to watch for approaching threats. The elevation gave him a commanding view of the forest below, where flashlight beams were beginning to sweep through the trees in their direction. The Duchess's face lit up with relief as she made contact with a trusted communications officer in Northmere. But as she began to explain the situation, the radio suddenly went dead, its power supply apparently failing at the worst possible moment. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by the distant sound of their pursuers calling out to each other as they methodically searched the mountainside. Elena walked to one of the windows and looked out at the forest below, her expression thoughtful despite the danger they faced. "They'll find us soon," she said matter-of-factly, displaying a composure that was both admirable and heartbreaking in someone so young. "But grandmother knows we're in trouble now. She'll send help." Kane wanted to share the child's optimism, but his tactical assessment of their situation was grim. They were trapped in a stone tower with limited exits, facing an unknown number of armed professionals who had demonstrated both planning ability and ruthless determination. Their only advantages were elevation and the psychological factor of knowing they were fighting to protect an innocent child. As if summoned by his thoughts, the beam of a powerful flashlight suddenly illuminated one side of the tower, followed by others converging on their position. The voices of their pursuers had grown closer, and Kane could hear the professional communication patterns of trained soldiers coordinating an assault. The final confrontation was about to begin, and everything would depend on whether help could arrive in time or whether 3 adults could somehow protect one small girl against overwhelming odds. The radio crackled unexpectedly back to life, filled with static, but carrying a faint voice that might have been salvation calling through the darkness. Princess Elena pressed close to the speaker, Sir Emerald held protectively in her arms, as she listened for any sign that her grandmother had received their desperate message. Outside, the circle of light was tightening around the tower, and Captain Kane checked his weapon one final time, knowing that the next few minutes would determine whether the Kingdom of Valdoria would lose its heir to a conspiracy that reached into the very heart of its government. The ancient stone walls of the watchtower seemed to pulse with tension as flashlight beams swept across its exterior like searching fingers. Captain Kane pressed himself against the narrow window opening, his trained eyes tracking the methodical approach of their pursuers. He counted at least 8 figures moving through the forest below, their tactical formation indicating serious military training. These were not mere hired thugs. They were professionals who understood siege warfare and building assault techniques. Inside the tower's main chamber, Duchess Catherine worked desperately with the temperamental radio equipment, trying to re-establish contact with Northmere. The ancient vacuum tubes glowed weakly in the darkness, and static filled the air with an otherworldly hissing that seemed to mock their efforts. Princess Elena sat cross-legged beside the radio, Sir Emerald in her lap, her dark eyes fixed on the Duchess with an intensity that was unnerving in someone so young. "The frequency needs to be adjusted," Elena said quietly, reaching past the Duchess to turn a knob with surprising precision. "Grandmother always uses the emergency channel during storms." Her small fingers moved with confidence across the radio controls, displaying knowledge that no 8-year-old should possess about military communications equipment. When the static suddenly cleared and a strong signal came through, Catherine stared at the child in amazement. The voice that emerged from the speakers was elderly but commanding, carrying the unmistakable authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed without question. "This is Northmere Command. Identify yourself immediately." The tone was crisp and professional, but underneath it, Catherine could hear the worry of a grandmother who suspected her granddaughter was in mortal danger. "Your Majesty, this is Duchess Catherine Mormont. Princess Elena is with me, and we are under immediate threat from hostile forces. Our location is the old watchtower in the Thornwick Mountains, approximately 12 kilometers southeast of Ravenshollow." Catherine spoke quickly but clearly, knowing that every second of transmission increased the risk of their position being compromised further. The response was immediate and decisive. "Duchess, this is Queen Mother Margaret. I have been expecting your call. Colonel Blackwood has been under surveillance for the past 6 months on suspicion of treason. Help is already en route to your position, but you need to hold out for at least 20 minutes." The revelation that Elena's grandmother had been conducting her own investigation into the conspiracy sent shockwaves through the tower. Kane's voice was urgent from his position at the window. "They're positioning for an assault. Multiple entry points, coordinated timing. These people know what they're doing." As if to emphasize his point, the sound of grappling hooks striking the stone walls echoed through the night air. The siege of the watchtower had begun in earnest, and their enemies were wasting no time in pressing their advantage. Princess Elena stood up slowly. Sir Emerald clutched protectively against her chest and walked to where Captain Kane was positioned. Her small voice carried clearly through the chamber as she spoke words that chilled everyone present. "Captain, there's something else you need to know about Uncle Blackwood. He killed my mama because she found out he was selling kingdom secrets to our enemies. I heard him telling someone on the phone that I might have overheard something that night. The confirmation that Crown Princess Isabella's death had been murder rather than accident was like a physical blow to everyone in the tower. Kane felt his professional composure crack slightly as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. They were not just protecting a child from kidnappers, they were the only witnesses to a treasonous plot that had already claimed the life of the heir to the throne. Outside, the assault began with the systematic efficiency of a military operation. Flashbang grenades exploded against the tower's lower levels, designed to disorient and confuse the defenders. But the ancient stone construction that had weathered centuries of mountain storms proved more resilient than modern materials would have been. The explosions echoed through the structure but caused no significant damage to the massive walls. Catherine grabbed the radio microphone again, her voice tight with controlled panic. "Your Majesty, they're storming the tower. I don't know how long we can hold them off." The Duchess's training as a former military officer was evident in her calm delivery, but everyone could hear the underlying fear for the child she had sworn to protect. Queen Mother Margaret's response carried the steel that had made her a formidable ruler for over 4 decades. "Catherine, there is a hidden passage in that tower that leads to natural caves beneath the mountain. Elena knows where it is. Use it and follow the underground river north until you reach the old mill. My people will be waiting there." The elderly queen's intimate knowledge of the tower's secrets suggested that this contingency plan had been prepared long in advance. Elena nodded solemnly and moved to a section of the stone wall that appeared identical to every other section. Her small hands pressed against specific stones in a sequence that spoke of previous instruction, and to everyone's amazement, a portion of the wall swung inward on concealed hinges. The opening revealed a narrow staircase carved into the living rock, descending into darkness that seemed to swallow their flashlight beams. Kane made a rapid tactical decision, his 20 years of experience telling him that staying to fight would only result in casualties among the people he was sworn to protect. "Everyone, into the passage, now. I'll hold them off as long as possible, and then follow." But as he spoke, the sound of boots on stone echoed from the tower's main stairwell, indicating that their enemies had breached the lower levels. The Duchess took Elena's hand and guided her toward the secret entrance, but the child suddenly stopped and looked back at Kane with eyes that seemed far too old for her young face. "Captain, they won't stop hunting us until Uncle Blackwood is arrested." "Even if we escape tonight, they'll keep trying to hurt our family." The statement was delivered with a matter-of-fact certainty that was both heartbreaking and profound. As they began their descent into the hidden passage, the sound of gunfire echoed from above, indicating that Kane was engaged in a desperate holding action against superior numbers. The narrow stone steps were slippery with moisture, and the air grew noticeably cooler as they descended deeper into the mountain's heart. Elena led the way with surprising confidence, her childhood exploration of these ancient caves now proving to be their salvation.
The passage opened into a vast underground chamber, where the sound of running water echoed off invisible walls.
An underground river, swift and cold, flowed through the cavern from south to north just as Queen Mother Margaret had described. But crossing it would require courage and skill, especially with an 8-year-old child who could not be allowed to fall into the rushing water. Elena surprised them again by producing a small waterproof flashlight from her jacket pocket, its beam revealing a series of stepping stones that crossed the river at its narrowest point. "Grandmother taught me to always be prepared when exploring caves," she explained, her voice echoing strangely in the vast space. "She said you never know when you might need to find your way in the dark." Catherine realized that the Queen Mother had been preparing Elena for exactly this situation, teaching the child survival skills disguised as innocent games and adventures. The elderly monarch had suspected the conspiracy against her family and had been quietly preparing countermeasures, including ensuring that her granddaughter could navigate the escape routes if necessary. Behind them, the sound of pursuit grew closer as their enemies discovered the hidden entrance. Kane's holding action had bought them precious time, but now they could hear multiple voices echoing through the passage, confirming that the captain had been overwhelmed by superior numbers. The race through the underground river system had become a desperate flight for survival. As they carefully crossed the stepping stones, Elena leading with the confidence of someone who had practiced this route before, Catherine couldn't help but marvel at the child's composure. Most adults would have been paralyzed by fear in such circumstances, but Princess Elena seemed to possess an inner strength that belied her young age. Sir Emerald bounced against her side with each careful step, the stuffed dragon somehow managing to look brave despite the impossible circumstances. The far side of the cavern revealed another passage, this one following the underground river as it flowed north toward the abandoned mill. The going was easier here, with a natural stone pathway that ran alongside the water. But the sound of their pursuers crossing the river behind them served as a constant reminder that safety remained elusive. Elena suddenly stopped and pointed to a side passage that branched off from the main tunnel. "That way leads to the old mine shafts," she said quietly. "If we hide there, they might go past us toward the mill." The tactical suggestion showed a level of strategic thinking that impressed Catherine. But it also carried obvious risks. If their enemies decided to search the side passages, they would be trapped with no further escape routes. The Duchess made the decision to trust Elena's knowledge of the underground terrain. They slipped into the narrow side passage just as the beams of powerful flashlights began to illuminate the main tunnel behind them. Pressed against the rough stone walls, they listened as their pursuers moved past, their voices echoing strangely in the confines of the ancient caves. But their relief was short-lived as one of the voices called out orders that chilled their blood. "Split up and check every side passage. The child knows these tunnels better than we anticipated. Don't let them reach the mill." The speaker was Colonel Blackwood himself, his cultivated accent unmistakable even in the distorting acoustics of the underground chambers. Elena pressed close to Catherine. Sir Emerald squeezed tightly in her arms as footsteps approached their hiding place. The child's eyes met the Duchess's in the dim light, and Catherine saw not fear but determination in that young face. Princess Elena had inherited more than just her mother's beauty. She possessed the courage and intelligence of a true royal heir, qualities that would serve her well if they survived the night. The beam of a flashlight swept across the entrance to their hiding place, pausing for a heart-stopping moment before moving on. But Catherine knew that they had been discovered, that their enemies were simply being methodical in their approach. Soon, very soon, they would have to make a final stand in the ancient darkness beneath the mountain, with only their courage and a child's knowledge of forgotten passages standing between them and a conspiracy that reached to the very heart of the kingdom. The abandoned mine shaft stretched deeper into the mountain than Catherine had imagined possible, its hand-carved walls bearing the marks of tools wielded by miners generations ago. Princess Elena led them through the maze-like tunnels with an uncanny sense of direction. Sir Emerald bouncing against her side as she navigated turns and intersections that all looked identical to the adults following her. The child's familiarity with these forgotten passages was both a blessing and a mystery that Catherine filed away for future contemplation, assuming they survived to have a future. Behind them, the systematic search continued as Colonel Blackwood's men methodically cleared each side passage. Their voices echoed through the stone corridors, professional and patient, the sounds of hunters who knew their prey was trapped and could afford to be thorough. Occasionally, the beam of a powerful flashlight would sweep past an opening, and the three fugitives would press themselves against the rough walls, scarcely daring to breathe. Elena suddenly stopped at what appeared to be a dead end, her small hands feeling along the stone wall with practiced familiarity. "There's another secret door here," she whispered, her voice barely audible even in the oppressive silence of the mine. "Grandmother showed me this one too. She said it was built during the Great War, when the kingdom needed hidden places for important people to hide." The revelation that Queen Mother Margaret had been preparing escape routes and contingencies for years painted a picture of a monarch who understood the true nature of the threats facing her family. As Elena found the hidden mechanism and another section of wall swung inward, Catherine began to appreciate the depth of planning that had gone into protecting the royal heir from exactly the situation they now faced. The passage beyond the secret door was different from the others, newer construction, with smooth walls and electric lighting that still functioned after decades of abandonment. This was clearly a purpose-built facility, designed for long-term occupation by people who might need to remain hidden for extended periods. The corridor led to a series of rooms equipped with basic amenities, including communication equipment that looked far more modern than anything they had encountered so far. Elena moved directly to a radio console that would have challenged adult operators, her small fingers dancing across controls with obvious familiarity. "Grandmother taught me how to use this one too," she explained as she worked. "She said someday I might need to talk to our friends in other kingdoms without the bad people knowing about it." The sophisticated equipment hummed to life under her guidance, its displays showing signal strengths and frequencies that suggested capabilities far beyond simple communication. Catherine watched in amazement as the 8-year-old princess established contact with what appeared to be a military command center in a neighboring kingdom. The response was immediate and professional, indicating that these channels were monitored around the clock, and that Elena's access codes were recognized at the highest levels of international security cooperation. "This is Princess Elena of Valdoria requesting immediate assistance." The child spoke into the microphone with a composure that would have impressed adult diplomats. My family is under attack from traitors, and loyal forces are en route to my position. We need air support to prevent the escape of the conspirators. The formal language and diplomatic protocols that Elena employed revealed yet another layer of the education she had received from her grandmother. The response crackled through the speakers with crisp military efficiency. Princess Elena, this is General Morrison of the Allied Defense Command. Your grandmother briefed us on the situation 6 hours ago. Strike aircraft are already in position, and Special Forces units have been deployed to seal off the mountain region. Hold your position and prepare for extraction in approximately 10 minutes. The news that help was already on the way sent waves of relief through the hidden chamber, but it also raised questions about how long Queen Mother Margaret had been aware of the conspiracy against her family. Catherine began to understand that what had seemed like a spontaneous emergency evacuation was actually the culmination of a carefully orchestrated counterintelligence operation that had been months in the planning. Elena's next words confirmed the Duchess's suspicions, while adding another layer of complexity to an already intricate situation. General Morrison, please be advised that Colonel Blackwood and his team have committed treason and murder. They killed my mother 3 years ago and are now attempting to eliminate me as a witness. Full evidence has been compiled and is ready for transmission on secure channels. The matter-of-fact way in which Elena discussed her mother's murder was heartbreaking, but it also demonstrated the remarkable strength of character that ran through the royal bloodline. This child had been carrying the knowledge of her mother's death for years, waiting for the right moment to reveal the truth and seek justice. Her apparent innocence had been a carefully maintained facade that concealed a keen intelligence and an unbreakable determination to protect her family and kingdom. Outside their hidden sanctuary, the search was growing more intense as Blackwood's men realized that their quarry had somehow disappeared from the mine tunnels they had been systematically clearing. Angry voices echoed through the passages, and the sound of equipment being moved suggested that more sophisticated detection methods were being employed. Time was running out, and the final confrontation was approaching whether they wanted it or not. Catherine positioned herself near the entrance to their hiding place, her weapon drawn and ready despite knowing that they were vastly outnumbered. Her military training told her that their best chance lay in remaining hidden until the promised extraction arrived, but she also knew that professional soldiers would eventually find any hiding place if they were given enough time to search properly. The radio crackled with an incoming transmission that made everyone freeze with anticipation. Queen Mother Margaret's voice filled the chamber, carrying the authority of a monarch and the love of a grandmother in equal measure. Elena, my dear child, are you safe? The aircraft are in position, and Captain Kane has been recovered alive. The situation is under our complete control now. Elena's composure finally cracked slightly as tears of relief spilled down her cheeks. Grandmother, I'm scared, but Duchess Catherine has been very brave and kept me safe. The bad men are very close now, and I think they know where we are. The child's honesty about her fear made her previous courage even more remarkable, highlighting the extraordinary inner strength she had displayed throughout their ordeal. The sound of approaching footsteps in the main tunnel outside their refuge confirmed Elena's assessment of their situation. Voices were getting closer, and the methodical search pattern indicated that their hiding place would be discovered within minutes. Catherine checked her weapon one final time and positioned herself between the entrance and Princess Elena, prepared to make whatever sacrifice was necessary to protect the child. But Elena had one more surprise in store for everyone. Moving to another control panel, she began activating systems that had been dormant for decades. Ancient ventilation fans began to turn. Emergency lighting systems illuminated throughout the complex. And most importantly, a sophisticated security system began broadcasting their location and the identities of their pursuers to monitoring stations across the kingdom and beyond. Grandmother taught me that information is the most powerful weapon, Elena explained as she worked. Now everyone will know who the traitors are and what they've done. Even if they hurt us, they can't win anymore. The child's strategic thinking was remarkable, demonstrating that she understood the broader implications of their situation far better than anyone had realized. The first explosion of the night suddenly rocked the mountain above them as military aircraft began their assault on the positions where Blackwood's vehicles had been detected. The sound was both terrifying and encouraging, proof that the promised rescue operation was actually underway. But it also meant that the colonel and his men would become increasingly desperate as they realized that their window of opportunity was closing rapidly. Catherine could hear voices just outside their hiding place now, and she recognized Colonel Blackwood's cultured tones as he directed his men in what he must have known would be their final assault. The irony that a man who had spent decades protecting the royal family was now its greatest threat was not lost on the Duchess, but her focus remained entirely on the child she had sworn to defend. Elena walked over to Catherine and took her hand, Sir Emerald tucked securely under her other arm. "Thank you for protecting me," she said quietly. "Mama always said that true loyalty is shown not when things are easy, but when everything seems impossible." The child's words carried a weight that spoke of wisdom gained through experiences no 8-year-old should have to endure. The hidden door suddenly shuddered under the impact of explosive charges as Blackwood's men prepared to breach their final refuge. But even as the ancient mechanisms began to fail under the assault, the sound of helicopters filled the air outside the mountain, and the crackle of military radios indicated that the extraction team had arrived. The race between rescue and capture would be measured in seconds, with the future of the Kingdom of Valdoria hanging in the balance. As the secret door finally gave way and armed figures poured into their sanctuary, Catherine threw herself between the attackers and Princess Elena, determined to buy precious seconds for the rescue that she could hear approaching. The child's small voice rose above the chaos, clear and strong despite her fear.
"I am Princess Elena of Valdoria."
"And I will not be afraid." Sir Emerald seemed to glow in her arms as the final confrontation began. Courage and determination facing down treachery and greed in the ancient darkness beneath the mountain, the sound of helicopters filled the mountain caverns with a thunderous roar that seemed to shake the ancient stone itself. Through the shattered remains of the secret door, tactical teams poured into the chamber with the precision of a military operation that had been planned to the smallest detail. Colonel Blackwood found himself surrounded by soldiers whose loyalty to the crown was absolute, their weapons trained on him and his remaining conspirators with deadly intent. Princess Elena stood beside Duchess Catherine. Sir Emerald clutched protectively in her arms as she watched the man who had killed her mother finally face justice. At 8 years old, she had displayed courage that would be remembered in the kingdom's history books, but now she was simply a child who needed comfort and reassurance that the nightmare was finally over. The relief in her dark eyes was profound as she recognized Captain Kane among the rescue team, his arm in a sling, but his determination undiminished. Queen Mother Margaret's voice crackled through the radio with the satisfaction of a plan perfectly executed. "Colonel Blackwood, you are under arrest for high treason, murder, and conspiracy against the crown. The evidence of your crimes has been transmitted to allied kingdoms and will be presented to international tribunals. Your network of conspirators has been completely exposed and neutralized." The elderly monarch's words carried the weight of absolute authority and the promise of justice long delayed. Blackwood's composure finally cracked as the reality of his situation became clear. The man who had spent 25 years in service to the royal family, who had been trusted with the most sensitive security matters, stood revealed as a traitor whose greed had led him to commit the ultimate betrayal.
"You have no idea what forces you're dealing with," he said desperately.
"This goes far beyond the kingdom's borders. Eliminating me will not end the threat to your family." Elena stepped forward, her small voice cutting through the tension with startling clarity. "Uncle Blackwood, you're wrong about one thing. We do know about the other bad people, because Grandmother has been watching them for a very long time. You thought you were clever, but she's cleverer." The child's words revealed yet another layer of the counterintelligence operation that had been unfolding for months behind the scenes. Catherine looked down at the princess with new understanding of the remarkable education she had received from her grandmother. Every adventure, every game, every lesson had been preparation for exactly this moment. Queen Mother Margaret had been training Elena not just to survive a crisis, but to be an active participant in protecting the kingdom from its enemies. The child's apparent innocence had been both genuine and carefully cultivated to serve as the perfect cover for a much deeper game. As the conspirators were secured and prepared for transport, Captain Kane approached Elena with the respect due to a member of the royal family, combined with the warmth of someone who had watched her grow up. "Your Highness, I owe you an apology. I underestimated your strength and your intelligence. You probably saved all our lives tonight with your knowledge of these passages." Elena looked up at the captain with eyes that had seemed too much for someone so young, but her response carried the grace that would serve her well as the future ruler of Valdoria. "Captain Kane, you protected me when you didn't know who to trust. That's what real courage looks like. Grandmother always said that a true protector serves the crown even when they're afraid." Her words carried a wisdom that impressed everyone present and demonstrated the quality of character that would define her eventual reign. The extraction from the mountain complex was executed with military precision. Helicopters lifting off into the dawn sky, as the sun finally broke through the storm clouds that had shrouded the peaks throughout their ordeal. Elena pressed her face against the aircraft's window, watching the ancient watchtower grow smaller in the distance, knowing that she was leaving behind a childhood that had ended abruptly with gunfire and betrayal in the mountain darkness. At Castle Valdoria, Queen Mother Margaret waited in the throne room with the patience of someone who had ruled through multiple crises and understood that true leadership required both planning and the courage to act when plans inevitably required adjustment. When Elena finally walked through the massive doors, still clutching Sir Emerald and flanked by Catherine and Kane, the elderly monarch's composure cracked for the first time in decades. The reunion between grandmother and granddaughter was profound in its simplicity. No words were spoken as Elena ran across the polished marble floor and threw herself into arms that had always represented absolute safety and unconditional love. Sir Emerald was squeezed between them, the stuffed dragon somehow managing to look satisfied despite being compressed by their embrace. "My brave girl," Queen Mother Margaret whispered, her voice thick with emotion. "You did everything perfectly. Your mother would be so proud of the young woman you're becoming." The reference to Crown Princess Isabella was both healing and heartbreaking, acknowledgement that Elena's ordeal had revealed truths that had been hidden for too long. Catherine stood watching the reunion with tears streaming down her face, overwhelmed by relief and by the magnitude of what they had all experienced together. Her decision to trust a child's instincts and flee the established security protocols had probably saved Elena's life, but it had also exposed a conspiracy that reached into the highest levels of the kingdom's government. The Duchess realized that nothing would ever be quite the same after the revelations of the past 12 hours. Captain Kane received medical attention for his injuries while briefing the Security Review Board on the events in the mountains. His report would lead to a complete restructuring of the Royal Protection Services, with new protocols designed to prevent the kind of insider betrayal that had nearly cost Princess Elena her life. The captain's courage in pursuing the Duchess and Princess despite orders to the contrary earned him promotion to head of the new security organization. In the weeks that followed, the trials of Colonel Blackwood and his conspirators revealed the extent of the international plot against the Kingdom of Valdoria. Evidence emerged of foreign agents, corrupt officials, and a network of traitors that had been operating for nearly a decade. The murder of Crown Princess Isabella was confirmed, bringing closure to a tragedy that had haunted the royal family for 3 years. Elena testified before the International Tribunal with a composure that amazed legal experts and diplomats from around the world. Her detailed recollections of conversations she had overheard, combined with evidence gathered by her grandmother's counterintelligence operation, provided the foundation for prosecutions that extended far beyond Valdoria's borders. The child who had been dismissed as too young to understand adult affairs proved to be the most credible and compelling witness in a case that reshaped international law regarding crimes against sovereign families. The stuffed dragon Sir Emerald was retired to a place of honor in Elena's chambers, bearing new significance as the companion who had shared in one of the most remarkable episodes in the kingdom's history. The dragon's button eyes seemed to gleam with knowledge of secrets that would be passed down through royal generations, a reminder that courage often comes in the smallest packages and that even children can change the course of history when circumstances demand heroism. Queen Mother Margaret formally invested Princess Elena with new responsibilities befitting someone who had proven herself under the ultimate test of loyalty and courage. The child who had entered the mountain passes as a protected heir emerged as a future monarch, who understood both the privileges and the burdens of royal duty. Her education continued, but now it included practical lessons in statecraft and the complex realities of ruling a kingdom surrounded by those who would do anything to undermine its stability. Duchess Catherine was appointed as Elena's chief advisor and protector, a role that recognized both her courage during the crisis and her unique bond with the princess. Together, they would work to ensure that the kingdom remained strong and that future generations would remember the night when a child's bravery and an adult's loyalty combined to save the crown itself from those who would destroy it. Years later, when Princess Elena became queen, she would often tell the story of the night in the mountains to young members of the royal family, emphasizing that true strength comes not from titles or ceremonies, but from the willingness to do what is right, even when the cost seems unbearable. Sir Emerald would listen from his place of honor, a silent witness to the truth that heroes are often smaller than we imagine, but their courage casts shadows large enough to protect entire kingdoms. The kingdom of Valdoria prospered under Elena's eventual rule, its stability built on the foundation of trust and loyalty that had been tested and proven in the ancient tunnels beneath the Thornwick Mountains. The story became legend, but those who lived through it knew that every word was true. Sometimes the smallest voice carries the most important message. And sometimes a child's courage is exactly what the world needs to remember. What honor really means. In the royal archives, carefully preserved alongside the official records of that night, sits a child's drawing of a stuffed dragon standing guard over a castle. The artist's signature reads, Princess Alina, age 8. And below it, in the careful handwriting of someone learning to write official documents, are the words that became the motto of her reign. True loyalty is shown when everything seems impossible. Sir Emerald watches over them all, a reminder that courage comes in many forms, and that sometimes the most important battles are won not by armies or weapons, but by the unbreakable spirit of those who refuse to let darkness overcome light.